Good afternoon. I'm here today with Ambassador Syed Jawad, who was the ambassador from Afghanistan to the United States, but not only the United States, also Brazil and Colombia and Mexico and Argentina from 2001 until 2010. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. He has recently been a Fisher Family Fellow here at Harvard University at the Kennedy School, and I'm very pleased to have the chance to have him say a few words to us today on video. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much. Great being here.
I'd like to begin by asking a very broad question, and that is simply, if from an American perspective, but not only an American perspective, an international perspective, why does Afghanistan matter? The United States and other countries are investing enormous amounts of resources in this country, and I thought it'd be useful to hear from you why the rest of the world should care so much about Afghanistan and its future.
The involvement of the United States in Afghanistan started with 9/11. The threat of terrorism has made actually the United States to come to Afghanistan and help us out. That threat is still imminent. We are dealing with a region that is very volatile. There are a lot of uncertainties about the future of some of our neighbors, particularly Pakistan and Iran. And the enemy, which is terrorism and Taliban, has not been fully defeated, neither in Afghanistan nor in the region. So by establishing a functioning government in Afghanistan, the United States will have a reliable ally in the most volatile region of the world.
Excellent, thank you. I'd also like to ask you a few questions, or maybe one or two, about the current NATO, Afghan, U.S. strategy in Afghanistan, and we refer to that strategy as counterinsurgency. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how appropriate a counterinsurgency strategy, a strategy which focuses on bringing security to the population in order to create an environment in which indigenous institutions can be built. How appropriate is that strategy for a country like Afghanistan?
From the military standpoint, this is the most appropriate strategy, and particularly in Afghanistan with the efforts of General McChrystal, continued by General Petraeus, we see the results of that strategy. The only issue with that strategy is that it's costly and it takes time. So even, I don't think you will see any argument against it. The only argument will be that it may take much longer than it should, and it's a lot more costly. For that argument, we should see that what is the cost of not doing it? In Afghanistan, the mission has been prolonged for almost 10 years. One reason is that we try to do it on cheap. We try to have short-term objectives instead of really focusing on a long-term objective in Afghanistan. So it's better to do it the right way from the beginning instead of going back many times and fixing it. It's going to be a lot more costly if you do it this way.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had about counterinsurgency strategy is that one of the components is that you need to have a strong indigenous partner. Governance is a big part of success in counterinsurgency. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the partnership between the coalition, NATO, and the Afghan government.
The Afghan government naturally depends on the partnership and support of the international community. The government in Afghanistan will not last unless that support is continued. Unfortunately, in the past 2 or 3 years, that partnership had weakened. There is no shared vision about the future of Afghanistan. Some of our shared struggles, be it fighting the Taliban, be it improving governance, have become extremely politicized. The expectations of the international community from the Afghan government to fight corruption effectively has not been met. And in many instances also the international community has not treated the Afghan government as an equal partner. So all of that has made actually our common struggle much more difficult. And we will hardly succeed in our shared struggle unless that partnership is reestablished. It's natural, it's normal for Afghanistan and the United States to have differences on their approaches. We are facing a brutal enemy with limited resources. The patience of the Afghans and Americans about the duration of that struggle is becoming thin. So there is a lot of common ground to work more closely to overcome these challenges. But unfortunately, there has not been effective communication at the very high level to re-establish the trust, the mutual trust and confidence that is necessary to overcome our shared challenges.
So you're here tonight at Harvard to give a lecture on reconciliation, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, what the prospects of reconciliation are in Afghanistan, the prospects for some sort of agreement between the current government and the Taliban to bring greater stability to Afghanistan. So what are the prospects, and what might this look like if it were to work?
So reconciliation is an important component of counterinsurgency strategy. There's a lot of discussion and also support both in the United States and Afghanistan among our NATO partners for the reconciliation. And there has initial talks have already started. What I'm afraid of that the drive for reconciliation so far is mostly fear-based. The Afghan government fears that if they do not make themselves an asset in the reconciliation process, the international community, especially the U.S., might do it actually without their inclusion and knowledge, and vice versa. So what it needs to be done is to create a clear vision for reconciliation, to draw the parameters of the compromises that we will have to make, because as much as the Afghan people support reconciliation, they're also nervous about the price that women or minorities that must pay in order to reconcile with Taliban, considering their dark history and past. But I would like to emphasize once again that both internally Afghans among themselves and Afghan international partners have to have a unified vision, have to and deal with reconciliation as part of a strategy to win the struggle in Afghanistan. If we reconcile in order not to lose, we are not going to actually achieve what our objectives are. And as you have asked, so the prospect will look a much larger political role for the Taliban, which will further actually deteriorate the quality of the governance in Afghanistan. Because the more politicized the governance issue in Afghanistan become, and the less quality will remain in the capability of the Afghan government to deliver services and provide protection. And therefore, political participation is part of the game. That's how it's going to look like. But if it's not properly managed, it will further deteriorate the quality of the governance, which will make actually security also unsustainable in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Twice now you've mentioned this idea of having a shared vision for Afghanistan and that it's lacking. What is the role of the region in creating this vision and actually realizing a vision? Afghanistan has always been at the crossroads of empires, and certainly I'd expect that the region would need to be bought into whatever kind of end state you're describing.
Absolutely, but if the end state is clearly formulated by the United States and our NATO partners, then our neighboring countries will adjust their attitude. If there is a clear message that the U.S. engagement in Afghanistan is long-term, then the attitude of our neighbors, particularly Iran and Pakistan, will change. Now there is a concern actually that there might be an abrupt change in Afghanistan, and all of these countries are trying to gain as much as influence as they could through many destructive means. Therefore, it's important to engage the neighboring countries. It's very important, but at this first stage, we have to know how our major allies, especially the United States and NATO, would like an Afghanistan to emerge in the next 10 to 15 years. What will be the degree and the depth of the partnership that we will have with the U.S., for instance? Once we have this formulated, then it's much easier to interact with our neighbors and try to either get their buy-in into the political process or draw certain lines that, yes, we would like to have friendly relations with, for instance, Pakistan and Iran, naturally, but then we have an important strategic partnership with all the other allies too. The uncertainty, the ambiguity that exists right now is the biggest fear that I see in Kabul. Even in Kabul, I just came back last week from Kabul. It's not security that people are concerned, it's uncertainty.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Is it uncertainty about what Afghanistan's future might be in the wake of departure of coalition forces, or is it a different kind of uncertainty? Is it the uncertainty around the July 2011 deadline, or am I having too much of an American focus? Is it other factors that are creating this web of uncertainty?
No, well, the timeline for the Afghan is beyond July and 2014. The problem is that the focus here is a lot more on July in 2014, and in
2011.
2011,
Yeah.
yes, 2011. So therefore, the technical preparations to bring the transition into place and make the Afghans more in charge of the security duties will succeed if we know what's the end state on the long run. Of course, we cannot predict it 100%, but publicly and even privately, there has not been a lot of discussion to formulate a long-term vision for the future of Afghanistan. We are just starting, actually, with our friends in the United States to discuss about the nature of the U.S.-Afghan strategic partnership. This discussion should be carried in depth, in a much higher level, to give a sense of assurance to the Afghans. Same thing on the issue of the reconciliation. There are different readings by the Afghan government, by the international community on the parameters of the compromises that needs to be made, and therefore the Afghans are uncertain that would it help with the security, or would that reconciliation means that they will have to give up a lot of the basic rights that they've earned in the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about the future of Afghanistan, let's talk a little bit about the economics piece. We note that Afghanistan is highly dependent on foreign aid, and I'm wondering what an Afghanistan that is more economically self-sufficient would look like. I know you're thinking and working on a lot of issues related to the private sector in Afghanistan, and be interested in your views on the potential for a more self-sufficient, economically oriented Afghanistan.
Fortunately, the foreign aid in the past 10 years have established better infrastructure in Afghanistan. We have a better pool of human capital in Afghanistan. The Afghan private sector is better linked now regionally and even internationally. In the lessons learned from Iraq, where the international contracting system stopped abruptly, has been lessons for Afghans. What the Afghan private sector would like to do is to look beyond government contracting when the amount of the funding for the contracting is reduced, and to get actually better linkages with the region. So I'm very optimistic about the fact that the Afghan economy will be able to sustain itself, being in the form of transit and connection in the region, reintegration into the economy of the region, or specifically certain areas such as minerals and others. Fortunately, we have two emerging powers in our neighborhoods, India and China, that will need a lot of the resources, energy and minerals that are readily available in Afghanistan. And that provides us also an opportunity to use their positive influence and their economic interest to bring political stability in Afghanistan.
My last question for you has to do with what's happening in the Middle East and the Arab Spring. This has captivated a lot of the world, and I'm wondering to what extent, you mentioned you just returned from Afghanistan, to what extent are Afghans watching what's happening in parts of the Arab world, and how do they feel about it? Does it resonate? Does it not resonate? Does it seem a world away?
Well, the so-called Arab Spring, or the uprising in the Middle East, has three dimensions. It's really driven by despair, disillusionment, and despotism. And we have two of these factors in Afghanistan, which is poverty and despair and disillusionment to a certain degree among young Afghans. What we don't have is really despotism. Afghanistan is a free society. People have the right to demonstrate or talk about their opinion. And in addition to that, because of our experience in the past 30 years, some of the abrupt changes have brought more misery to the Afghan people, being in the form of the communist coup d'etat, or the Mujahideen government in Afghanistan, or the Taliban takeover. So to a certain degree, the Afghan youth are more seasoned, more experienced, and more cautious. I talked about this issue with a number of young people in Kabul. They are afraid that if such movement starts, it might be hijacked by the Taliban and other elements who are better organized, they have weapons, And we saw that actually in the incident in Mazar-e-Sharif, where unfortunately three very innocent UN workers who were there to serve Afghanistan were killed. And that was through a demonstration that started probably emotionally, if not politically motivated, but easily was taken over by some elements of the Taliban and other, and turned into a crime, which was supposed to be a simple demonstration. So there is certain degree of caution and among Afghan people, especially among Afghan youth, to not to go into a route that the results will benefit some of the extremist group, because they are better organized, and the Afghan youth are not properly organized and does not have a political platform.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the service to both of our countries. Thank you for being a fellow here at Harvard, and thank you for joining us tonight at this taping and in the speech we're about to go to.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be a fellow here. I enjoyed so much being here and learned a lot, and it's so great to be back here.
Excellent.
Thank you.